Comey under oath calling the president a liar. Donald Trump's attorney firing back, calling Mr. Comey a leaker.
Well, tonight America's faced with high drama, high stakes case of he said, he said.
Now we have in-depth coverage and analysis tonight, beginning with KCAL 9 political reporter Dave Bryan. Dave.
It was a big day for the L words, okay, right off the bat. Now, somebody said today it wasn't really the Super Bowl, but it was the beginning of the playoffs. It may have been the most widely watched congressional hearing since Watergate, but tonight it's not clear whether the eagerly awaited testimony from the former FBI director will change much. A hearing that pitted James Comey in a head-to-head battle with the Trump administration.
Swear to tell the truth.
Former FBI Director James Comey, who was fired last month in a flurry of controversy, charged President Trump and his administration created a tangled web of lies about him and the FBI.
The administration then chose to defame me and, more importantly, the FBI by saying that the organization was in disarray, that it was poorly led, that the workforce had lost confidence in its leader. Those were lies, plain and simple.
In fact, Comey said it was really all about the Russia investigation. That's why he was fired, he says. In response to this question from California Senator Dianne Feinstein.
Why do you believe you were fired?
I take the president at his word that I was fired because of the Russia investigation. Something about the way I was conducting it, the president felt created pressure on him that he wanted to relieve.
And Comey said it was his fear of presidential lies that pushed him to keep detailed memos about his meetings with Mr. Trump.
I was honestly concerned that he might lie about the nature of our meeting, and so I thought it really important to document.
But during an audio-only White House briefing, Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked if President Trump is a liar.
I can definitively say the president's not a liar, and I think it's frankly insulting that that question would be asked.
The president's son, Donald Jr., tweeted, "I'm pretty sure that Comey's testimony put his own character on trial. Leaks, admitted weakness, Lynch double standard. Come on now." At one of his meetings, Comey declared President Trump pressured him to be loyal to him in return for allowing Comey to remain the director of the FBI.
My common sense told me what's going on here is that he's looking to get something in exchange for granting my request to stay in the job.
Many of the questions zeroed in on a one-on-one meeting between the president and Director Comey, where, he says, Mr. Trump suggested he should let the Michael Flynn investigation go, and what that meant.
I hope you can let this go. Now, those are his exact words. Is that correct?
Correct.
You may have taken it as a direction, but that's not what he said.
Correct. That's what
he said, I hope.
Those are exact words, okay. Correct.
But Comey said he hopes the conversations were caught on tape, indicating they would vindicate his memory of the conversations.
I've seen the tweet about tapes. Lordy, I hope they're tapes. All I can do is hope. The president surely knows whether he taped me, and if he did, my feelings aren't hurt. Release all the tapes. I'm good with it.
Democrats pounced on the discussion of the Flynn investigation and President Trump's request to let it go.
President Trump's pattern of contempt for justice, his pattern of concerted and inexcusable efforts to shut down the FBI's investigation of his cronies' ties to Russia, and all of that, I think, disgraces the office of president.
But Oklahoma Republican Senator James Lankford confronted Comey with the fact that Trump had already said the same thing on Twitter.
Quite frankly, the president has informed around 6 billion people that he's not real fond of this investigation. Do you think there's a difference in that?
Yes.
Okay.
I think there's a big difference in kicking superior officers out of the Oval Office, looking the FBI director in the eye and saying, I hope you'll let this go. I think if the agents, as good as they are, heard the President of the United States did that, there's a real risk of a chilling effect on their work.
Comey also explained why he leaked one of his memos about a conversation with Trump to the press through an intermediary.
I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
President Trump's attorney went on the attack, suggesting maybe Comey should be investigated now.
Mr. Comey admitted that he leaked to friends of his purported memos of those privileged communications, one of which he testified was classified.
And he fired back at several of Comey's highest profile charges.
The president never, in form or substance, directed or suggested that Mr. Comey stop investigating anyone The president also never told Mr. Comey, quote, "I need loyalty. I expect loyalty," close quote.
At the end of the day, Loyola Law School professor and LA Ethics Commission President Jessica Levinson says the hearing probably didn't change lots of minds.
At the end of the day, we were about where we were at the beginning of the day, where President Trump's supporters think this is kind of a witch hunt, and President Trump's opponents say, there's something here. This is a very serious man, the former director of the FBI, who was fired because of an ongoing investigation into ties between Russia and the Trump administration.
Well, after more than 2.5 hours of public testimony, Comey joined the Intelligence Committee in a closed-door session where they presumably discussed some classified matters connected to all this. And while the congressional committees will continue to probe, the heavy lifting now will probably fall on special counsel Robert Mueller and his team of investigators. Jeff and Lena?